Well, we're on the heels of the divisional round of the 2016/17 NFL playoffs. So, as I promised, here is an updated one round 2017 mock draft. Oh boy. Now, some of you that have followed me for a few years know that a lot of times when I do these mock drafts, especially early on in the process, I go through different scenarios or say, if this happens, this is what I could envision happening. And in this particular case, what I did was in this scenario, I had the quarterbacks dropping. Not just Kizer, not just Watson, but even Trubisky. I had no quarterbacks going in the top 10. And I wanted to see how things would shake out, how things would kind of play out. And as I put together this mock draft, the ironic thing is out of all the mocks that I've done so far, now granted, whether or not you guys agree with the mock or think it's a good mock or not, when I was putting it together, it felt like the best mock I had done. It felt the most based in reality, or more so based more off of where maybe players should go, not necessarily just to teams, but in the particular draft range. Because based off of what I've seen so far, hoping and wishing for Mitch Trubisky or DeShone Kizer or even Deshaun Watson to be a top 5 pick is one thing. Them actually being worthy of that draft spot is an entirely different situation altogether. And that's just the way it is. So looking at this, I was like, let me see what happens. And I actually felt pretty good about this mock draft. I actually really, really did. So let me talk about it a little bit. I'll start off with the quarterbacks, because that's where I always gravitate to. I've got Trubisky going number 12 to Cleveland. I'll talk more about Cleveland in a little bit. You know, I'll be stunned if Trubisky doesn't go in the first round. I probably will be somewhat stunned if he doesn't go top 5 and surprise people, kind of like Blake Bortles did back in 2014, but that's not exactly the kind of company you want to keep when you're talking about where you get drafted and what type of NFL quarterback you want to be. But that's the way it is. I think plenty of Giants fans are still tickled to death. The last mock draft, I had DeShone Kizer going number 23 to the Giants, and that's where I have him going again. Now, some may sit there and say, well, why not Deshaun Watson? This is a guy coming off of a national championship, 2 straight years playing in the title game. He's played in some big games. He's had some big moments. And all that is true. And one of my favorite things about Deshaun Watson is that at the end of the day, when the chips are on the line, in the big games, he seems to play his best. He has that clutch factor that I don't think Trubisky and Kizer certainly have. With that said, though, he threw a lot of interceptions the last 2 years. Some will say, well, Jameis does that. Well, yeah, Jameis did that at Florida State too his last year. That's true. And he has those games that are absolute stinkers at the NFL, sprinkled in with some really good ones as well. But why a DeShone Kizer over Deshaun Watson? When you're looking at it from a Giants standpoint, they don't need the quarterback to play right away. I think Deshaun Watson is more NFL ready than DeShone Kizer. That doesn't mean long term that Deshaun Watson is necessarily the better prospect or not. It's just saying that when you look at the Giants, to me, DeShone Kizer, he's bigger. He's got more NFL arm talent. And as a result, when you're thinking about Odell Beckham Jr. and the ability to stretch the ball down the field, I think DeShone Kizer brings more of that to the table on a more consistent basis than a Deshaun Watson. I think the upside is bigger with DeShone Kizer, and I think it would behoove the Giants to get a quarterback in the fold because Eli Manning's going to start falling off a cliff very, very soon. He's already kind of started to. You don't want to get caught with your pants down in 2 or 3 years when he's washed up and done, and you got to move on from him, and you have no solution, no alternative in house. What are you going to do? You're going to keep Ryan Nassib, and he's going to be the dude? Give me a break. So he makes sense. If you're wondering about guys like Deshaun Watson and Pat Mahomes, a little bit of a shakeup here. I had Deshaun Watson going much higher this time. He went early portion of round 2 to the Chicago Bears, believe it or not, in part because if he's going to be involved with the Senior Bowl and the Bears coaching staff, John Fox, is going to be down there at the Senior Bowl. It's going to be a real chance for them to be able to connect. It's going to be a real chance for them to be able to figure out what type of player he is, what type of quarterback he is, what type of leader he is. And I think it would be a good natural fit, especially bring him into a situation where you've got a really good running game with Jordan Howard in the backfield. Deshaun Watson could make some sense for the Chicago Bears. And then I've got Pat Mahomes going in the second round to Buffalo. Part of the reason why I had him passing on the quarterback at number 10 was because there could be guys there in round 2 that they could get where there's not going to be that much of a difference. And that's the way it's kind of be. Now, for guys like Deshaun Watson and Pat Mahomes, if you're a team and you're looking at potentially taking them early in round 2, I would strongly advocate trying to peel up into the back end of round 1 because if anything else, you get that 5th year of team control over the guy. You get one more year potentially where you can control that quarterback's cap figure, especially at the tail end portion of round one. It's a very appealing cap figure, even in the 5th year if you pick up the team option. I want that. As opposed to like you look at Oakland in 2014, they took Derek Carr, and Derek Carr is a stud, MVP candidate this year. But now you're going into a contract year with him where he's coming off of the broken leg, and it shouldn't have any long-term ramifications for him. But if you look back at the Oakland Raiders draft of 2014, as great as that was with Khalil Mack in round 1 and then Derek Carr in round 2, how much better would it potentially look if you had Derek Carr be taken in the late end of round number 1, where you potentially could wait another full season before you have to worry about tying up a bunch of your cap space into him? I'm just saying. So thinking about it from that perspective, it would make a lot of sense for teams like the Bears, like the Bills, and maybe some others, in the early portion of round 2 to try and peel up into the top end portion of round 1 to take one of these guys, even if they carry a second round grade. The quarterback position, again, is a little bit different. And that's where, even though I feel really good about the quarterbacks being put where I put them right now in this mock, that doesn't mean that's where they end up. Possibly. So anyways, let's talk about some teams here. Go with Cleveland and Tennessee first because of the 2 teams with 2 first-round picks right now. When you look at Cleveland, some of you might be surprised I have Jonathan Allen over Myles Garrett. Some of you may not. You probably know I'm a little bit bigger fan of Jonathan Allen than Myles Garrett. I think Myles Garrett is a better fit for Cleveland, especially as Cleveland's going to probably transition full-time to a 4-3. But Jonathan Allen could play end or tackle in a 4-3 and be a dominant stud either way. I think it's one of these things. Do you prefer the better all-around football player, or do you prefer the athletic upside? The athletic upside with Myles Garrett is incredibly appealing, similar to Jadeveon Clowney in 2014. However, the better all-around football player, like Khalil Mack was in 2014, to me might be Jonathan Allen this year. So when you're looking at it, the Cleveland Browns need quality football players. Jonathan Allen is that dude. I don't think for them you can necessarily go that wrong with a quarterback not really being worth the number 1 overall pick. They've put themselves into a situation where they have to take one of these guys. It can still definitely benefit the organization long term. It really helps that they've got that second first-round pick, where in this case at number 12 I've got them taking Mitch Trubisky. Now at the end of the day, I will say this for Cleveland. If they truly feel that Mitch Trubisky is that guy, I would not fuck around. I would take him number 1 overall. Even if he's not fully worth the position, if you think he could be a franchise quarterback, who gives a shit if Jonathan Allen and Myles Garrett are all pros? Because if Mitch Trubisky is your long-term answer at quarterback, that's worth its weight in gold. It's the mistake the Browns made last year not staying put and taking a guy like a Carson Wentz. You can sit there and say, well, in the future, you never know how a quarterback class is going to break down from one year to the next. You just don't know. You think about it, a year ago, all the mock drafts had people like Brad Kaya and Deshaun Watson going in the top 5, and that shit's not happening. It's just not, at least the way it stands at this moment. So if you feel Trubisky's your guy, the one thing I will say for Cleveland is take him at 1. Don't fuck around. If he's your dude, don't run the risk that one of these 10 other teams picking in front of you they're all going to pass on him. One of them might fall in love with him and take him anyways. Too many teams that are quarterback needy that could convince themselves that they want a guy like Trubisky, like the 49ers, the Bears, a dark horse there, maybe the Jaguars, the Jets. You got all of these teams, the Bills as well. All these teams could be looking at quarterback. So if Trubisky's a guy, or if they felt Kizer was a guy, take him at number 1. It's ironic, though, as is so often the case when the Browns have 2 first-round picks. They spend the first pick on somebody else, and then the second pick on the quarterback. I would have a hard time really knocking them if this is the way it broke down, because they'd be taking arguably the best player in the entire draft, in my opinion, in Jonathan Allen, and then they'd be getting a guy who, given time, could potentially develop into at least a Dalton type of quality starter, franchise quarterback, borderline type of guy for Hugh Jackson in Cleveland. Tennessee, you look at their draft, it was very tempting to maybe put Jamal Adams there at pick number 5 for them. I know last time I think I had Adoree Jackson there. This time I put Mike Williams there. I don't know that Mike Williams is necessarily a top 5 pick, especially with the serious neck injury that he had from 2015. With that said, when you look at this draft, I give you this. Would you rather have Jamal Adams and maybe John Ross or Corey Davis, or would you rather have Mike Williams and maybe Quincy Wilson? Some Titans fans might agree with me, some may not. But when I was piecing together this mock, it felt like Mike Williams belonged somewhere in the top 10. And that's where I've got him going. The Jets with Fournette at 6, talking about that one really quickly. I've made my preferences known about Dalvin Cook over Fournette. I would be surprised ultimately at the end of the day, even though I could see Fournette drop some because of durability concerns and the fact that Cook can do more. Somebody probably falls in love with Fournette in the top 10. But Tennessee, Mike Williams, Quincy Wilson, you got to feel really, really good about it. Even from Cleveland's standpoint, to backtrack really quickly, talk about trading back up into round one. When you look at where they're picking, let's say you get a Jonathan Allen if you're Cleveland at number 1, and then at number 12, both Leonard Fournette and Dalvin Cook are on the board. You got to take one of those two guys. And with the 2 second-round picks that you have, that's where you could potentially peel up into the bottom portion of round 1, and you get a guy like Mahomes, you get a guy like DeShone Watson, or maybe you really love DeShone Kizer, another Ohio kid just like Trubisky. To me, the Cleveland Browns, if they don't come out of this draft with 3 first-round picks, they're doing something wrong. And if it broke that way, where both of those running backs are there in striking distance, where even if they had to peel up slightly from 12 to maybe 9 or 10 to get one of them, they need to do that and then get the quarterback a little bit later. That's what they got to do. But some other notable picks you look at really, really quickly that I wanted to touch on. Carolina, I've got them taking Solomon Thomas, the defensive end from Stanford at number 8. I think he's a guy that's going to shoot up quite a bit in the process. You've probably noticed he's starting to creep up my draft board and in my mock drafts in recent weeks. Why not Derek Barnett? I think some teams will look at Solomon Thomas perhaps as a little bit more explosive. Derek Barnett, they might view as a Shaq Lawson type of guy where he belongs more in the top 20 than he does in the top 10. Why a defensive end for Carolina and not somebody like a running back? Well, Fournette's already off the board, who probably is a better natural fit for what Carolina likes to do in the running game. I don't know if an offensive tackle at this point, since Ramczyk's already going forward to Jacksonville, because that's what the Jaguars would do. I don't think an offensive tackle is worth the pick at 8 there. You could sit there and say a corner, but they just invested multiple day 2 picks in corners last year. They might want to improve their pass rush. Even though in theory their sack numbers weren't bad, that doesn't mean they got enough of a consistent pass rush, and that's something the Carolina Panthers need to get back. Arizona taking Corey Davis at 13. I know there were a few Cardinals fans in the last mock that really questioned this pick. Look, got Larry Fitzgerald on the borderline of retirement. Michael Floyd is gone. John Brown, who knows what you're going to get out of him long term. And J.J. Nelson has some moments, but they're moments, and he's still only a slot guy. You need somebody on the outside. And when I look at other players available that would make sense for them at this moment in time, Corey Davis is the best fit at pick 13, and that's just the way it is. Pick 14, Indianapolis with Dalvin Cook. Now, I know Colts fans are already in a tizzy about Gregson and Pagano being retained. Who could blame them? And I understand there will be a frustration with this pick from some because they're going to sit there and say, well, you got to take a defensive guy. You got to take a defensive guy. They need defensive help all over the place. That's how you protect Andrew Luck. And maybe that's partly true, but there's also something to saying taking the best player available. And I know this argument was used a couple of years ago to defend the Philip Dorsett pick, but we're talking about Philip Dorsett as opposed to Dalvin Cook, who for my money is the number 1 running back in this draft class. The best way to potentially protect Andrew Luck is give him a 3-down back that can do all types of things and take some of the pressure off of Andrew Luck, which can also potentially help keep your defense off the field. You come into this draft, you're the Colts. Frankly, you suck on both sides of the ball, and that's just the way it is. You need help on both sides of the ball. You can't be so married to the defensive side of the ball that you pass on a far superior offensive prospect. And looking at the draft board at this point in time at pick 14, who's better than Dalvin Cook on the defensive side of the ball? I love Takkarist McKinley, but he's not a better prospect than Dalvin Cook. Zach Cunningham, I love him as a prospect. Not better than Dalvin Cook. Derek Barnett, Quincy Wilson, Jabrill Peppers, who else? Sidney Jones, Marshawn Lattimore. Good players, quality players, solid players, but they're not Dalvin Cook. You're in a position with the Colts where you still need difference makers. And if that difference maker in the first round happens to come on the offensive side of the ball, then so damn be it. Because even if you look at Frank Gore, they've had to use in bits and spurts, and he's coming to the tail end of his career. You need a long-term answer at the position. Dalvin Cook is a special talent. You take him. End of discussion. Baltimore at 16, some might be surprised to see Takkarist McKinley there. He strikes me as that try-hard, max-effort type of edge rusher that you know what you're getting out of him, that Ozzie Newsome would really gravitate to and his scouting department would really like, that kind of safe type of guy. Similar to like a C.J. Mosley a couple of years ago. You put them in a good position and they will ultimately succeed and potentially thrive at the NFL level. You look at Suggs and Doomerville, they're at the tail end of their careers. There's no certainty in terms of edge rusher long-term on the front seven of that defense. Maybe some will point to a Judon or the draft picks that were taken in the second, third round this past year in Kamale Correa and Bronson Konfusi. But at this point in time, until they prove something, you have nothing there. Judon showed the most last year, obviously. McKinley would make a lot of sense there. Tampa Bay getting Derek Barnett. I'm sure some Bucs fans would like to see an offensive tackle or a wide receiver, maybe an interior lineman, maybe somebody in the secondary, particularly a safety like a Jabrill Peppers. Barnett at pick 19, that's a good range for him. He makes sense there. And some might say, well, you just took Noah Spence in the second round last year. Yeah, you took him in the second round last year. That's great. And maybe that's your long-term answer on one side. Is there anything wrong? Is there anything illegal about having another qualified edge rusher on the other side? I don't think so. I don't think so. Atlanta taking John Ross at 29. There's a part of this that is a bit of troll mode for me because apparently every time I do a mock draft for the Falcons, I always get crapped on for it. So I like to fuck with you Falcons fans. Sometimes you can be fucking morons. But nonetheless, I could have mocked a tight end here, so... Really, this is mostly just troll factor, but honestly, would it be that bad to take a John Ross at 29? Falcons fans, flame away at me and let me know why it is. And then Dallas at 31, with guys like DeMarcus Walker and Taco Charlton on the board, and Caleb Brantley from Florida, and these Cowboys fans that are in this delusion that they're fine at defensive tackle. And no, you're not. You need help everywhere on that defense, arguably. Especially on the defensive line. Why in the hell would you not want to build up your defensive line similar to you did the offensive side of the ball? It just blows my ever-loving mind. But with that said, in this particular case, I went in a different direction, and I went O.J. Howard. Now, clearly the Cowboys' biggest needs are on the defensive side of the ball, but in this particular case, O.J. Howard is a really good prospect, represents pretty good value here. And you got to look at it long-term. Jason Witten's been in the league 14 years now. He's not quite the same player that he once was. He'll go to the Hall of Fame someday, but he's not a Hall of Famer anymore. He is a solid role player. But long-term, what do you have at that position? The answer is nothing. So what's wrong with bringing in a guy that can be a well-rounded tight end like an O.J. Howard, have him learn from a future Hall of Famer, and then eventually take over that position? Because long-term, we can talk about the defense needing to be strengthened, but you have to strengthen up that offense around your franchise quarterback, Dak Prescott, too. And granted, you've got Ezekiel Elliott in the best offensive line in football, but Dez Bryant, he comes and goes at different times, and you don't have much else at wide receiver. It would be nice for them to have an intermediate target like an O.J. Howard for Dak Prescott to go to. So in that sense, I think this pick actually makes a lot of sense. Cowboys fans want to disagree with me, go ahead. Don't give a fuck. But anyways, like I said, when it all comes to pass, I actually felt better about this mock than some of the other ones that I've done. Whether or not you guys agree with me, though, different story.